Hello, dear friends. It's an honor to be with you this day. And today I will talk about plant conservation in modern Israel, challenges, success, and failures. Our corner of the world, which means Israel, Palestine, and West Jordan, is typified by being half Mediterranean with about 400 millimeters of annual rain and half desert. So the far south of the region near the Red Sea gets about 20 or 30 millimeters of rain every year, which is very little. And the top with the Galilee or Mount Hermon gets maybe 900 or even 1,000 millimeters of rain. This is a severe aridity gradient, which forms all kinds of habitats along its way. And our rich flora evolved also due to the different geology, different altitude. This is why we have flora, Mediterranean coastal flora, continental Irano-Turanian elements that penetrate our region, and the desert Sahara Arabian flora. It's actually a climatic junction and also a continental junction. If we look at the numbers of our flora, we are lucky to have 2,700 native species. Out of them, 300 are endemic or sub-endemic, and 460, unfortunately, are already endangered. In Israel, we protect about 650 species, and we have about 200 alien species, which is not very much, but some of these species are really problematic, as you probably imagine. The ornamental flora is very rich, and we have over 5,000 taxa in Israel itself. And the largest plant collection in the region is where I work, at the Jerusalem Botanical Gardens. If we go back to the map of the area, and this is a map showing the national parks and nature reserves, we can see that most of the reserves, especially in the center of the regions, are very small and disjunctive. And the only large nature reserves are in the periphery of the country, especially in the south, in the Negev desert. So this makes the whole situation really vulnerable. So actually what we have a peripheral situation. So all the species actually are either Mediterranean elements that are disappearing in the desert or vice versa. So it's a combination of a lot of peripheral plants. If I have to choose one plant that we tried to protect in the botanical garden and we were really successful, it would be Sternbergia clusiana, which is a bulbous plant. That used to grow on the other hill where the botanical garden is located, but since then they built the high school and the highway over there, and the bulbs, a few dozens of them, were translocated into our garden in the 80s. And out of these a few dozens of plants, we have today 500 clumps of Sternbergias which bloom every November, and actually they flourish without any treatment. So there is no irrigation, there is no whatsoever treatment to encourage them. We do not need to hand pollinate them if we want more seed, because there are very few insects. So that's something we have to tackle again and again. Half of the flora, which is typical for all the Mediterranean, is annual. So you can see this diversity, annual diversity. And we are trying to introduce these plants into gardens and parks. You can see Israel-Palestina, which is an endemic coastal plant, which is doing very well in all kinds of soils, not only in the coast. Here you can see it in one of the farms next to Tel Aviv. So this is a wildflower that is now in our gardens. Or you can see here the Syrian cornflower, Centaurea cyanoides, that in nature blooms for probably 10 days or 2 weeks, but if you sow it in September, irrigate it, you can have it blooming in cultivation for 4 or 5 months. So these are the kind of manipulations we are doing in order to encourage the plants in cultivation and get more seeds out of them. The same with lupines, and then we get all kind of color mutations. So there is always, especially in our garden, I wouldn't say the tension, but the connection between nature and preserving the diversity and the genetic diversity in nature and cultivation and its own needs. Sometimes it's very difficult to convince, to invest in cultivation, in conservation. So, for example, this Valerianella kochii, which is known today in only one site in the region, is a plant that its size is my finger. So if I would have shown it to my wife, she would have said, "Oh, why are you investing any money or any energy in these tiny plants?" And my answer would probably be, you know, we don't know anything about this plant. Perhaps this plant will produce a new medicine. Perhaps this plant has an importance in its natural habitat. So that's what we are doing at the Botanical Gardens. We are explaining the importance of conservation to the people. You know, the clients, our clients, the nature lovers or the really, you know, plantsmen, people are really interested in plants. We don't have to convince them. We have to convince the people about conserving diversity, and this is tough. It's easier when you do it with beautiful flowers like the agrostemas. So we have these two species that used to grow in the land and disappeared with the move of traditional managed agriculture to modern agriculture. And today we grow them a lot and we do a lot of things with them. We're doing displays, we collect the seeds with volunteers, we clean them with volunteers, with special groups, you know, mentally disabled people, war trauma people, all kinds of, you know, special groups, prepare the seeds in packages, we sell them. That's how we fund our community programs. We distribute the seeds in community gardens, in schools, in botanical gardens, in nature reserves. So we do a lot of things with, you know, with one plant like the agrostema. One especially endangered habitat, I would say, is the valley alluvial soils. And here you can see one of our scholars enjoying Allium schubertii, which you probably know in Europe from the flower shops. But in Israel, it is really endangered and remained in really handfuls of sites, or Salvia agii, which is an endemic that grows only here. This is the Salvia agii germinates easily and grows easily, so we can really propagate it and really reintroduce it in several places quite easily. So in some cases, it's very easy. In other cases, it might be more difficult. The other approach we do is we approach the ecology and the plant community. So Professor Ronen Kadmon from the Hebrew University is leading research on annual plant communities in the botanical gardens in experimental plot for years. And he and his team are checking, you know, who likes whom, who doesn't like whom, what is going on. They do models, and this is really exciting. It has theoretical, ecological importance, but also practical importance. How can we preserve the large plant communities, diverse plant communities in one place? We are doing also some systematic research. This is a research I'm involved in. I was involved in about the Allium nigrum complex, and in this case, plants that used to be lumped under Allium nigrum were found to be different species. So out of one diverse, widespread species, suddenly we got 3 very local and endangered species. So in this case, systematics really pointed out the importance to save these kind of species. One of the species, Allium basalticum, is already cultivated. It is already sold in the Dutch flower markets as Allium silver spring, and it's already a cut flower worldwide. It is also used for new hybrids. So we are really working with the green movement within Israel, with the nature reserves, with the forestry department and stuff like that. But we are also working with the horticulture industry. So we are giving services to all kinds of these organizations. Here you can see another allium that was described by by us and another one. We are also checking populations, and we're looking at the borders between species. So Aris britanniae, which is a local endemic, and Iris histrio, which is more common towards Turkey, or doing research in the most famous Oncocyclus iris. Dr. Jerusalem-Sapir at Tel Aviv University is doing research on them. They are all, 8 or 9 species, very local, very closely related genetically. And disjunctive. So again here, some of these species were cultivated. You can see on the left side a cultivar, and this is a field where these plants were cultivated. So we are really using the wild diversity to emphasize the importance for cultivation, for medicine, for the future generations, but also to conserve the diversity and in nature. And 2 plants that really got extinct in the country were saved in our garden. One is the Campanula peregrina, which reaches its 1,000-most population in the Western Galilee, and Salvia bracteata, which is still thriving in Jordan, but in Israel got extinct. So we really learned how to propagate them and how to manage them. Campanula peregrina became an ornamental in our regions. Salvia bracteata was more tough. It's very difficult to germinate them, and we needed the help with the Israel Gene Bank to solve some of the germination problems. And we are looking for clients for our, merchandise, which is plants. So we found a park next to our garden that was willing to plant these stages with a green club high school children. So we are doing a lot of things with community. We have a lot of projects, coexistence projects in our garden. So here you can see Jews and Arabs, Jews and Muslims are mixed together. They are young, so they are naive. And I'm saying this in a good way. And we are teaching them the languages, and we are teaching them how to make olive oil or how to make za'atar spices, or all kinds of activities which they learn in the garden, and they also learn about diversity and conservation. Interns that are funded by our British Friends organizations are coming to Israel, and they are doing a lot of propagation of the locally endangered plants, including this magnificent plant that is called Reum palestinum, or desert rhubarb, which is really a wonder. Look at the topography of the leaves. These huge leaves, which is an antithesis of the desert, it's a desert plant, is really collecting in its small wadis and washes in the leaves. It's really collecting a lot of water only in rainy years. In dry years, it wouldn't do anything. In the far south of the country, we have doing some research and some surveys, and Dudi Rivner, which is a local botanist, have found Cliome prisanta, which is a plant that used to be known only from Sinai, Egypt, but now it was found in proper Israel. So this is a plant. Now, we failed a lot of times with propagation of such desert plants. So seeds of Mediterranean plants in general tends to germinate more easily than seeds of desert plants. So a lot of work on conservation is being done in our nursery with a team of our staff, but also with volunteers and interns and students, including high school students and their projects. Also in the extreme desert, we have Caparis decidua, which is primarily a bird-pollinated caper, which is also a challenge to propagate. But some plants are simple. So for example, the papyrus, which is locally endangered, we grow because it's ornamental, it's locally endangered, it's biblical, so there are stories to tell about. It is useful. You can tell about, the making of the ancient papyrus paper. So these kind of things are these kind of plants are very important for us to grow. We also grow plants that came from different parts of the world. So in the land, we have Nymphea alba, coming as an Euro-Siberian northern element, meeting Nymphea cerulea, which is a tropical African. So we teach a lot about this. We We preserve a lot of wild grasses, especially the wild wheat, and I don't have to convince you how important it is. And all the subject about progenitors of edible plants is very important as a subject in our garden education programs around it. So here you can see wild pears and wild plums and even wild apples, although this is Areolobus. So these are very, very important. Some of our locally endangered species are really widespread species. So they really reach the end of their range in Israel, in this case, in the Upper Galilee. And we can say that these are really peripheral populations, which are very special and very important to preserve. And the orchids, which are, attractive to a lot of plantsmen, most of them are really common in the country, but we have one desert orchid, which is Epipyctes veratrifolia, which grows in desert springs, which are really scarce around the Dead Sea. It's more common in Jordan, it's less common in Israel and Palestine, and we already managed to propagate it easily vegetatively by cutting its rhizomes. So this is rather easy to propagate. And other desert plants that are really tough, like this Papaver decani, which has these tiny seeds that do not germinate, and we cannot convince them to germinate. That's the trick. We had a nice collaboration with the Royal Botanic Garden in Jordan, where we work on the desert fig Ficus palmata. So we are trying to collaborate with a lot of institutes and gardens all over the world, and also locally working on Dianthus libanotis, with its magnificent flowers. You can see it's almost like a fingerprint. Every flower from different plants look differently. So plant conservation, with whom? We are doing this internally with our garden staff, and we are doing it with our volunteers, we are doing it with special groups. I was talking about that before, national and park authorities, Society of Protecting Nature in Israel, botanical gardens, local and international, local shelter gardens for endangered plants in the country, community gardens, municipality, definitely the Jerusalem municipality next to our garden, schools, teachers, pupils, the Jewish National Fund, Rotem, Israel Plant Information Center, botanists, professionals and amateur, and the most important with the general public. So it's a real challenge to tackle all this and to work with all kinds of populations. So you probably heard about the politics of our region. We feel that our garden is an island of peace within troubled Jerusalem and troubled Israel-Palestine. We have a lot of Arab groups coming, a lot of Arab families coming, a lot of Jews. So everybody is very peaceful in our garden, and we are very proud about these kind of projects. So I would like now to thank you and show you one magnificent a very rare plant called Mishoxia campanulata. Seeds of these plants were sent to the Oxford Botanical Gardens and bloomed this year in Oxford. So we're very proud to have one of our local rarities in the UK. Thank you so much, and hope to see you somewhere here or there.